Bert. How dare you talk back at me? Her mate hit her minutes later. The Alpha made him beg for his life. The kingdom of Arendor lay under a dark sky, where the clouds seemed heavier than the mountains themselves. Night here was not merely a time, it was a presence, creeping through the streets, lingering in the forests, whispering in the ears of those who dared to wander. In the heart of this land, a castle rose like a black flame, its spires cutting through the mist, its walls holding centuries of secrets. This was the seat of Kalen, the Crimson Alpha, feared by all who lived under his rule. Inside the castle, the grand hall was filled with tension. Torches flickered against the stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows. Lords and warriors from the surrounding villages bowed low, murmuring in fear and respect. None dared to meet Kalen's eyes for more than a heartbeat, for his gaze could pierce the strongest armor and his anger could shatter even the bravest soul. At the center of the hall, a young woman stood, her head high despite the whispers around her. Leora, her hair dark as midnight and eyes bright with unspoken fire, had always been careful. She knew the rules. She knew the dangers. And yet, tonight, something inside her stirred. A voice that refused to be silenced. The council had gathered to discuss the borders of the kingdom, which had been threatened by a rival pack. Kalen, as the Alpha, spoke with authority. His voice rolled over the hall like distant thunder, commanding precise, sharp operation. The villagers of Ashen Hollow will relocate immediately. Any delays will be met with punishment.
A murmur rose from the council, but Leora did not move.
She stepped forward, her voice clear and trembling only slightly.
My lord!
If the villagers leave, they will lose their crops. The harvest is nearly ready.
They will starve before the next season. The hall froze. The words, spoken so simply, struck the air like a sudden chill. Kalen's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to shrink. No one had ever dared speak against him. No one had dared question the Alpha's commands. Kalen's voice thundered, shaking the hall. How dare you talk back at me? His words were fire and ice, and the temperature in the room dropped with their weight. Leora felt the room spin, but she did not step back. You would defy me? He asked, his voice low now, almost a growl. Every inch of him radiated power, tall, broad, like a shadow-made flesh. His presence was overwhelming, yet Leora noticed a flicker in his eyes, a flash of something, almost inspiration. I only speak for the people, she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear clenching her chest. I do not wish to disobey you, my lord, but if the villagers leave now, many will not survive the winter. For a moment, Kalen's fury held the room in silence. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Leora could feel the tension like a storm about to break. The other lords shifted nervously, glancing at one another, waiting for the Alpha to strike. And yet, he did not strike. Kalen's gaze lingered on her, sharp and intense. It was dangerous, the way he looked at her, as if trying to unravel her very thoughts. You are bold, he said finally, almost to himself. And reckless. Leora swallowed. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest. Bold? Reckless? She had always known that speaking her mind was dangerous, but something inside her refused to bow completely. Even fear could not silence her.
Kalen's eyes darkened again. You will leave this hall at once, girl, he commanded.
But his voice was not the same as before. There was a storm beneath it, but also curiosity. Leora bowed her head slightly. "Yes, my lord," she said, though the defiance in her heart had not faded. Bray. She turned to leave, but the tension did not leave her shoulders. She felt the weight of his gaze follow her, and for the first time she sensed that the Alpha was as restless as she was. Desperation. Outside the hall, the night had deepened. The castle was alive with shadows that moved in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Desperation. Leora walked down the stone corridor, her steps echoing in the silence. The torches along the walls flickered in a breeze that should not have been there, as though the castle itself was whispering about the courage or the foolishness of the girl who dared defy the Crimson Alpha. Burrit. As she reached the outer courtyard, a figure stepped from the shadows. Ravik, Kaelin's enforcer, tall and imposing, blocked her path. Bray. His face was unreadable, but his presence alone made the hairs on her neck stand on end. "You speak too freely, girl," Ravik said, his voice low, smooth, and dangerous. "Do you not know what defiance costs in this castle?"
Leora stood her ground, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze unwavering. "I speak only truth," she replied.
Desperation.
"And I will not let fear dictate the lives of those who cannot defend themselves."
Ravik studied her, a shadow of a smile passing briefly across his lips. Brave? Desperation. Or foolish? Perhaps both. Before Leora could respond, Ravik stepped closer, his shadow merging with hers. The tension in the air grew so thick it felt as though it could be cut with a sword. Brr. And yet, in that moment, Leora sensed something unexpected. Her courage did not falter. She felt alive in the way she had never known. Desperation. A sudden sound shattered the quiet, a roar that shook the stones beneath her feet. Kaelin appeared in the courtyard, his figure framed by the moonlight. Brr. His eyes burned with a fire that seemed almost unnatural, and every step he took resonated with authority. "Ravik," Island said, his voice low but deadly. Brr. "Step back." Ravik's jaw tightened, and for a moment he did not move. Brr. Then, slowly, he obeyed, bowing slightly as Kaelin approached Leora. Kaelin stopped before her, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Desperation. His eyes scanned her, and for a moment the storm in them softened. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. But the power beneath it was undeniable. Desperation. "No, my lord," Leora whispered, though she knew her heart was racing like a wild horse. Kaelin's gaze lingered, and in that instant, Leora felt something shift. Fear was still there, yes, but mingled with it was a spark of something she did not understand. Fascination. Perhaps even respect. "I should punish you for your words," Kaelin said finally, his voice regaining its steel. "But tonight, you are spared." Leora bowed her head, unsure whether to be grateful or frightened. Desperation. She had survived, but barely. Kaelin stepped back, his eyes lingering on her for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and then he turned, vanishing into the shadows of the castle. Leora's knees weakened, and she sank onto the cold stone steps of the courtyard. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in a rhythm she had never known. She had faced the Crimson Alpha, and lived. But survival was only the beginning. The events of tonight had changed something deep within her. She had seen a side of Kaelin few ever glimpsed. Not just the storm of his anger, but the glimmer of something hidden beneath. Something that whispered of power, of longing, of redemption yet to come. And then the quiet was broken again. Desperation. A shadow moved along the edge of the courtyard, Ravik, silent as a predator. Leora's body tensed, every instinct screaming danger. Desperation. You are brave, he said softly. But bravery alone does not save you. Before she could react, he lunged. Leora stumbled backward, her hands catching on the cold stone wall, but Ravik's grasp was stronger. Panic surged through her, and for the first time she wondered if defiance had been a mistake. A sound like a clap of thunder echoed through the courtyard. Bray. Kalen appeared, his form almost a blur as he moved with impossible speed. He struck Ravik with a force that sent the enforcer sprawling across the ground. Leora's breath caught in her throat. Kalen's eyes were fixed on her, filled with a storm of anger and something deeper, something unreadable. Desperation. Are you unharmed? He demanded, his voice low, dangerous, almost protective. Leora nodded, still trembling. Brett. Kalen stepped closer, the night around them thick with tension. And in that moment, Leora realized something profound. She was no longer just a girl in the shadows. Brett. She was part of something larger, something that would demand courage, defiance, and a heart unafraid to challenge even the Crimson Alpha himself. And as Kalen's gaze held hers, the castle seemed to whisper, the wind carrying words that only Leora could understand. This is only the beginning. The shadows have already taken notice. Cliffhanger. As Leora caught her breath, a figure watched from the darkness beyond the courtyard, a presence neither she nor Kalen could yet see clearly. Something ancient stirred, drawn to her courage and defiance. The night was alive with secrets, and the first threads of destiny had already begun to weave themselves around the girl who dared to speak back to the Alpha. The night in Arendor had a strange stillness. The moon hung high, its silver light cutting through the mist like a knife. In the courtyard of the Crimson Castle, shadows moved with a life of their own. Leora had retreated to her chambers, her body still trembling from the encounter with Ravik, but her mind was racing faster than ever. She could still feel the heat of Kalen's presence, the weight of his gaze, and something deeper, something unspoken, that lingered long after he had vanished into the castle's shadows. Kalen, meanwhile, did not sleep. He stood on the balcony of his private chambers, the cold wind whipping his dark hair around his face. His eyes were fixed on the forest beyond the castle walls, where the trees bent as though listening. He thought of Leora. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her courage, her defiance, her small figure standing so tall against him. And yet, beneath his pride, he felt a stir of guilt and fear. Ravik. The enforcer had acted with reckless strength, striking at Leora as though she were an object to be punished. Kalen's teeth clenched. No one dared harm his mate. Not truly. Ravik would pay. The next morning the sun rose over Arendor, but the light did little to ease the tension in the castle. Kalen summoned Ravik to the forest just outside the eastern walls, where the trees grew thick and shadows were long. The enforcer approached, his steps cautious, though he tried to hide it. He had never seen Kalen look so dark, so alive with storm and fury. Kalen stood waiting, tall and unyielding. The air around him seemed charged, the wind whispering between the branches. Ravik stopped a few feet away, bowing slightly, though Kalen's eyes bored into him like sharpened steel. You harmed her, Kalen said, his voice low, but every word carried the weight of a thunderstorm. Do you understand what that means? Ravik swallowed. I only followed orders, my lord. You struck my mate, Kalen interrupted, his hand rising in a motion that made the branches tremble.
And for that you will kneel. Ravik's pride faltered.
He looked around, suddenly noticing how small he felt beneath the Alpha's shadow. Slowly he bent his knees, his forehead almost touching the cold, damp ground. I beg your forgiveness, Alpha, he murmured, voice shaking. I will never act without your command again.
Kalen's eyes softened just slightly, but his hand did not lower.
Inspiration. You will do more than beg my forgiveness, he said. You will beg hers. Ravik's head snapped up. Inspiration. Her? Kalen's gaze was steady, unyielding. Yes, Bray. You will seek Leora. You will ask her for her mercy, Bray, and you will do it knowing that you have no right to expect it. Ravik's jaw tightened. Pride and fear battled within him, but he knew better than to defy the Crimson Alpha. Inspiration. Slowly he turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving Kalen alone with the wind and the shadows.
Back in her chambers, Leora had begun her day quietly.
Inspiration. She walked to the balcony, brushing her dark hair from her face, and stared at the forest where Ravik had vanished. She had feared him, yes, but she also felt a strange sense of curiosity. The events of the previous night had changed something in her. She could feel her own strength awakening, a power she did not fully understand, whispering at the edge of her senses. Bird. And then Kalen appeared. He moved silently, like a shadow melting into her room. Inspiration. His presence was immediate, overwhelming, yet oddly protective. You will forgive him? He asked quietly, his voice almost gentle. Inspiration. Leora shook her head. I don't know, she admitted, but I will hear him. I will let him try. Inspiration. Oh. Ow! Inspiration. Kalen studied her, his eyes softening in a way few had ever seen. You are braver than you know, he said. And stronger than even I expected. Leora's heart fluttered. She did not understand the warmth in his tone, this unexpected gentleness, Brea. And yet it made her nervous, for she had learned that Kalen's kindness was rare, fleeting, and often followed by a storm. By midday, Ravik returned. Inspiration. His steps were hesitant, his head bowed. Leora met him in the courtyard, the morning sun illuminating the fear in his eyes. He knelt, just as Kalen had demanded. I am sorry, he said, voice strained. I harmed you when I had no right. I beg your forgiveness, for my actions were not only cruel, but undeserving of your presence in this world. Leora looked at him silently. She saw the fear in his eyes, but also something else, shame, respect, and perhaps a flicker of understanding. Inspiration. She nodded once, slowly. You may rise, she said, her voice calm but firm. Ray, do not forget that strength is not in striking others, but in protecting them. Remember that. Breath. Ravik rose, humbled. I will not forget, my lady, he said, and then retreated, leaving the courtyard empty save for Leora and the wind that whispered through the stone pillars. Kalen appeared again, emerging from the shadows like a guardian. Braid. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Leora.
You could have been hurt worse, he said quietly, almost a growl.
Bird, do you understand what you are to me? Leora's breath caught. I think I do, my lord, she said softly. Bert, you protect, but you also demand obedience. I know that. Kalen's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. Yes, but know this. My protection is not weakness, Brit. It is strength. And my anger, though fierce, is only meant to keep you safe. Bree. Leora nodded, her heart pounding. She realized that Kalen's anger, his power, his fury, were all part of the force that could shield her from the dangers that lurked beyond the castle walls. Brr. And yet, she also realized that she could not simply bow in fear. She had to understand him, to learn him, if she were to survive, and perhaps even to thrive, in the shadow of the Crimson Alpha. Bree. Later that evening, the castle grew quiet once more. Leora wandered the outer gardens, where the night flowers bloomed under the moonlight, and the shadows seemed to watch her. The events of the day replayed in her mind, especially the way Kalen had moved. His presence a mixture of storm and shelter. She sensed something deep within herself shifting. Brr. A power, subtle but undeniable, whispered at the edges of her awareness. When she concentrated, the air around her seemed to hum, and the shadows stretched toward her like they recognized her strength. It was as if the forest itself knew that she was no longer just a girl in the castle. She was something more, something vital to the kingdom's future. Kalen watched her from a distance, unseen. He felt it too, the change in her. Every step she took, every defiant glance drew him closer, both in fascination and concern. He had never encountered a mate who challenged him so completely, who awakened something in him beyond desire or possession. She had stirred not just his anger but his respect, his curiosity, and something he could not yet name. And then the wind shifted. Shadow moved in the trees beyond the garden walls, one that did not belong to the night. Leora stiffened. Her instincts screamed danger, and the hairs on her arms rose. Kalen's senses flared as well. The forest had eyes, and it was watching. Before either could react, a figure emerged from the mist, a tall, cloaked stranger whose presence seemed to bend the shadows around him. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the night itself was warning them. Leora took a step back, fear and awe mingling in her chest. The stranger's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried across the garden. "The Girl of Fire has awakened," he said. And with her, the curse stirs once more.
Leora's eyes widened. She did not understand the words, but she felt the truth in them.
Something ancient, something powerful had noticed her. And with that notice came danger, one that neither she nor Kalen could yet fight alone. Kalen stepped forward, his form a barrier between Leora and the stranger. His eyes blazed, and his voice was like thunder. "You will not harm her," he said. "I will not allow it." The stranger chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Ah, Alpha," he said. "Even your strength has limits. And this girl, she may be stronger than you imagine." And with that he vanished into the mist, leaving only the echo of his words and a growing tension that wrapped around the castle like a shadowed chain. Leora's breath came in shallow gasps. She looked at Kalen, whose gaze had softened once more, though the fire of his fury lingered. "Who was that?" she asked. Kalen did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "That," he said quietly, "is the beginning of a storm neither of us can yet control. But I promise you this, I will not let it touch you, not while I draw breath." Leora nodded, but deep inside she knew that the storm was already coming. and that her defiance, her courage, and the power she had barely begun to understand would be the only thing standing between the kingdom and the darkness that waited in the shadows. The night grew darker, the castle more silent, and somewhere in the forest a whisper of magic stirred. Leora realized that the path ahead would demand bravery beyond anything she had ever known, and that the Crimson Alpha, as fearsome and powerful as he was, would need her as much as she would need him. Bird. And in that quiet, tense moment, the first threads of destiny began to weave themselves around them both, binding them together in ways that neither could yet comprehend. Cliffhanger. As Leora stared into the forest, the shadows seemed to twist and bend toward her. Something ancient and powerful had noticed her awakening. She felt the pulse of magic, the promise of danger, and the certainty that the night would bring challenges beyond anything the Crimson Alpha could fight alone. Beret and Kaelin, standing behind her, sensed it too. A storm was coming, and it would demand courage, trust, and a bond forged in fire. The sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting Erendor in a wash of blood red and violet. Shadows stretched across the castle walls, curling like living things, and the wind carried whispers that made even the bravest soldiers uneasy. Leora stood at the edge of the outer courtyard, her dark hair brushing against her shoulders. She could still feel the stranger's words lingering in her mind. The girl of fire has awakened, and with her, the curse stirs once more. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the cold stone of the castle wall. She had always been careful, always obedient, yet now she sensed that something inside her had changed. A spark of power, subtle and strange, pulsed at the edges of her senses. She didn't understand it fully. She didn't know what it meant, but it was there, whispering that she was more than just a frightened girl living under the rule of the Crimson Alpha. Kaelin emerged silently from the shadows, his long coat brushing the ground. Even in the dim light, he looked formidable, his presence commanding the courtyard as if the night itself bent to his will. Barash. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You have felt it, he said quietly, his dark eyes fixed on hers. Baration. The power inside you, it is awakening. Leora nodded slowly. I feel it, she admitted, but I don't understand it.
Baration. I don't know what it means, or how to control it.
Kaelin's gaze softened, yet the storm in his eyes never fully faded. You are part of something older than this kingdom, he said.
Baration. Something stronger than even my pack. Breath. That power is dangerous if you cannot control it, but it is also, Baration, remarkable and necessary. Her heart quickened. She had never imagined that she could hold power that even the Crimson Alpha recognized. Baration. Fear mingled with a strange thrill, and she realized that the woman she had been before, timid, careful, obedient, was fading. Something new was emerging. Their moment was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the edge of the forest. The soldiers in the courtyard shouted, drawing their weapons, and a dark shadow moved among the trees. Leora and Kaelin exchanged a glance, the tension thickening between them. Kaelin's hand brushed against hers briefly, not touching her directly, yet the contact sent a shiver through her. Stay close, he ordered, his voice sharp. This may be the rival pack, or worse. The forest parted, revealing figures cloaked in shadow. The rival pack had come, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, and the air seemed to vibrate with menace. Leora's pulse raced, but Kaelin stepped forward, his form a shield between her and the approaching danger. The first figure lunged, and Kaelin met him with a strength that seemed almost inhuman. He struck with precision, forcing the attacker to retreat, but more emerged from the shadows. Brr. Leora felt fear prick her spine. But then, something inside her stirred. The power she had felt earlier, that strange spark, began to pulse through her. Brr. Without thinking, she lifted her hands, and the air around her shimmered. Shadows recoiled, twisting away from her as if afraid. Inspiration. A strange warmth spread from her chest, radiating outward, and the attackers froze, their movements faltering. Kaelin's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with awe. Inspiration. Leora, he murmured, you've done it.
You've awakened your gift!
The fight continued, but the tide shifted. Leora felt a surge of confidence, a sense that the power inside her could protect not just herself, but others as well. Brr. She pushed outward, and the shadows of the enemy pack recoiled like mist in the wind. Kaelin fought beside her, and together they moved as one, his strength and her power combining in a way that neither could have anticipated. Inspiration. After the last attacker fled into the forest, the courtyard was silent. The soldiers stared at Leora in awe, and Kaelin's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. Inspiration. His eyes were filled with a mixture of pride, admiration, and attention he could not hide.
You have much to learn, he said quietly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face.
And soon you will have to face more than just rival packs. There are forces in this kingdom older and darker than either of us, and they will test you. Leora nodded, her mind racing. She had always been cautious, but now she understood that she could not hide. The power within her demanded attention, and with Kaelin beside her, she felt both excitement and fear. Inspiration. Days passed, and Kaelin began to train Leora in secret. Each morning they met in the forest surrounding the castle, where shadows shifted and trees seemed to bend towards them. He taught her control, showing her how to harness the strange energy that pulsed within her. At first it was difficult. The power was unpredictable, surging when she did not expect it and faltering when she needed it most, but Kaelin was patient, guiding her with a careful balance of firmness and encouragement.
Trust yourself, he would say. Do not fear what you cannot yet understand.
Inspiration.
You are stronger than you realize. During these moments, their bond deepened.
Leora began to see Kaelin not just as a powerful alpha, but as a man capable of care and respect. And Kaelin in turn saw her defiance not as rebellion, but as courage, a courage that matched his own. The tension between them grew, unspoken but undeniable, as they trained side by side beneath the watchful eyes of the forest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of orange and violet, Kaelin and Leora returned to the castle together. The air was thick with anticipation, and Leora could feel the pull between them, a silent force that made her heart beat faster. They reached the outer wall where Kaelin stopped and turned to face her. There is more to this power than you know, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Inspiration. It is connected to the curse that has haunted my family for generations. And soon, you will have to decide whether to embrace it or resist it. Both choices carry danger. Bearing. Leora's breath caught. She had faced fear before, but now the weight of destiny pressed upon her. She understood that her life, and perhaps the kingdom itself, was no longer her own. Yet, for the first time, she felt a strange confidence. She was not powerless. She had strength, courage, and a bond with the Crimson Alpha that could weather storms. Inspiration. Kaelin stepped closer, his eyes dark and intense. I cannot protect you from everything, he admitted.
But I can stand by you. Always.
Inspiration. And together, we might be able to face what is coming. Leora met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. "I will not run," she said, Beration. "And I will not hide. Whatever is coming, I will face it." A shadow moved in the distance, unseen by either of them. Burra. The stranger from before had not left. He watched from the forest, his cloak blending with the night, his presence a silent warning. Beration. He knew Leora's power had awakened, and he smiled faintly, a cruel edge to his expression. "So it begins," he whispered, his voice carried away by the wind. Brr. That night the castle was quiet, but Leora could not sleep. She stood by her window, looking out at the forest that seemed to pulse with unseen life. Brrr. She felt the energy inside her humming softly, as if waiting for the moment it would be needed again. Beration. And she knew that moment would come sooner than she expected. Kalen appeared behind her, silent as always. Beration. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a protective touch that sent warmth through her chest. "Rest, Leora," he said softly. Beration.
You will need your strength. The darkness is coming, and it will test you in ways we cannot yet imagine. She nodded, leaning slightly against him.
For a moment there was peace, a quiet that felt almost fragile in a world so full of danger. But even as she closed her eyes, she could feel the pull of destiny, the stirrings of the curse, and the presence of something ancient and powerful that had taken notice of her. In the forest beyond the castle, the stranger moved closer. He raised his hands, and the shadows around him writhed like living things. "She is more than they realize," he said. "And soon, the real test will begin. The girl of fire will either rise, burst, or fall." The next morning, a scout arrived at the castle with urgent news. The rival pack had gathered allies from the northern mountains, and their numbers were growing. Beration. Leora and Kalen exchanged a glance, both understanding the implication. The battles ahead would be more dangerous than anything they had faced so far, and Leora's power, though growing, might be the key to survival or destruction.
Beration. Kalen reached for her hand, a rare gesture of intimacy.
Whatever happens, he said quietly, we face it together.
No matter the danger, no matter the cost.
Leora's fingers intertwined with his, and for the first time she felt the weight of destiny not as a burden, but as a challenge she was ready to meet.
Together, they would face the shadows, the rival packs, and the ancient curse. And together, they would discover the strength of their bond, a bond forged in fire, defiance, and the promise of something greater than either could face alone. Beration. As they prepared for the coming battles, a sudden chill swept through the castle. The forest beyond twisted unnaturally, and from the shadows 2 glowing eyes watched Leora. The stranger had returned, and this time he was not alone. Dark forces were gathering, drawn to her power, and the test of her courage, control, and bond with Kalen was about to begin. The night whispered one clear warning. The true danger had only just begun.
The castle of Arendor was silent, yet the air felt alive, as if it were holding its breath.
The forest beyond swayed under a restless wind, and the shadows seemed to twist unnaturally. Leora stood at the top of the highest tower, the cold stones beneath her hands grounding her as she gazed into the darkness. Bereft, she could feel her power surging, stronger than ever. The spark that had awakened in the forest had grown into a flame, and it pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Beration. Kalen appeared behind her, his presence as solid and commanding as the walls of the castle. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his broad shoulders.
The enemy gathers, he said quietly, his voice a low rumble. They have brought more than rival warriors this time.
Forces older than any of us are moving. The curse, it stirs again. Ray. Leora turned to him, her gaze steady. "Then we face it," she said, her voice stronger than she had ever imagined. "Desperation. Together. Whatever comes, we face it." Kalen's jaw tightened, and for the first time a faint smile touched his lips. "I thought I was the only storm in this kingdom," he said softly. "But you are fiercer than I imagined." The night deepened, and with it came the first tremors of the approaching threat. From the forest, shadows shifted unnaturally, and an eerie mist began to creep toward the castle. The stranger, cloaked in darkness, had returned, and he was not alone. Around him figures emerged, their forms twisted and strange, as though drawn from nightmares. Kalen moved beside Leora, his hand brushing hers briefly, a touch that sent warmth through both of them despite the chill in the air. "Stay close," he warned. "Do not let fear control you." Leora nodded. She could feel the power inside her thrumming like a living thing. She had trained, learned, and controlled it. And now the moment had come to test it fully. She lifted her hands, and the air around the tower shimmered. The shadows recoiled, twisting back as though afraid to touch her. The stranger's voice echoed across the courtyard, soft but filled with authority. "So, the Girl of Fire stands at the heart of the kingdom. Will she rise or fall?"
Kalen stepped forward, his form a wall of strength between Leora and the enemy.
"You will not harm her," he said, his voice booming. "Not tonight." Not while I draw breath." The first wave of attackers surged forward, but Leora did not falter. She raised her hands higher, and a wave of energy radiated from her, like sunlight breaking through the night. The shadows were pushed back, and the attackers stumbled disoriented. Kalen moved with her, his fists striking with precision and power, protecting her and the castle alike.
Leora felt a surge of confidence, a deep connection to the power inside her. She realized that her strength was not just for defense, it was a force that could change the tide of the battle.
With each pulse of energy, the shadows shrieked and twisted, unable to withstand the combined force of her magic and Kalen's strength. The stranger's laughter echoed through the night, cold and cruel. "You are strong," he said, "but you cannot contain what has been set in motion. The curse is older than the castle, older than your bloodline. And it will not be denied!" Leora's gaze sharpened.
"Then I will deny it," she said boldly, stepping forward.
Her power flared brighter and the air shimmered with energy. She felt Kalen's hand find hers, steadying her. Their bond, forged in courage and defiance, flowed between them, amplifying their strength. Together they advanced, their movements in perfect rhythm. Kalen struck with the force of a hurricane, and Leora's energy surged outward, scattering the shadows and striking at the enemy. The courtyard became a storm of light and shadow, strength and power, and for the first time the castle itself seemed to respond to them, as if the ancient walls recognized the bond between alpha and mate. The stranger raised his hands, summoning the deepest shadows, shapes that twisted into forms too strange and terrifying to describe.
Leora faltered for a moment, fear creeping into her heart, but Kalen's grip on her hand was firm, steadying her.
"Rest. Do not fear," he said softly. "We are stronger together."
She closed her eyes and focused, letting the energy inside her flow freely.
The shadows around the stranger hissed and recoiled. With a surge of power, Leora sent a wave of light that struck the stranger directly, and he stumbled, his form flickering like a flame in the wind. The curse, ancient and powerful, had been challenged, and it trembled before her strength. Kalen moved quickly, his hand striking with precision, breaking the remaining attackers. They fell back, defeated, unable to withstand the combined force of Alpha and Mate. The courtyard was silent again, save for the soft hum of Leora's energy and the sound of their breathing. The stranger struggled to rise, his voice shaking with fury. "This is not over," he whispered. "The curse cannot be broken so easily. You may win tonight, but the shadows, they never die."
Kalen stepped forward, his eyes dark and commanding. "Leave this place," he said, "and do not return."
Not while she stands. The stranger's eyes glowed with anger, but he vanished into the night, leaving behind only the memory of his power and the threat that the darkness was not yet fully gone. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted but victorious. Kalen knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "Brave. You faced the curse, and you stood your ground." Tears welled in Leora's eyes, but they were not of fear. They were of relief, pride, and something deeper, a recognition that she had grown stronger than she had ever imagined. She looked at Kalen, and for the first time she saw not just the Alpha, but the man beneath, strong, fierce, and capable of love and care. Kalen reached for her face, brushing a stray lock of hair from her eyes.
You are remarkable, he said, and you are mine.
Not as a subject, not as someone to control, but as my equal, my partner, my mate.
Leora's breath caught, and a warmth spread through her chest. "And you are mine," she said softly, her voice steady.
"I trust you. I will stand with you, always." They embraced, the weight of the night's battles fading as they held each other. Around them, the castle seemed to sigh, as if the walls themselves had witnessed the triumph and the bond that had been forged. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to heal. The rival pack retreated, their forces scattered, and the whispers of the curse quieted. Leora continued to train, her power growing stronger and more controlled with each passing day. Kalen remained at her side, teaching her, protecting her, and learning from her in return. Their bond deepened, a mixture of respect, trust, and the quiet, steady flame of love. The people of Arendor began to see a change in the Crimson Alpha. Once feared for his anger and ruthlessness, Kalen became a leader of wisdom and strength, guided not only by his own power but by the courage and insight of his mate. Leora, once timid and cautious, now stood as a figure of hope and strength, a woman who had faced shadows and emerged victorious. One evening, standing together on the castle's highest tower, they looked out over the kingdom bathed in the golden light of dawn. The forest stretched endlessly, the mountains standing tall and proud, and the wind carried a sense of peace that had been absent for centuries. Kalen took Leora's hand in his, their fingers entwining naturally. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "There will be more challenges, more darkness, but together we can face anything." Leora nodded, her eyes shining. "I know, and I will face them with you." Always. The castle stood tall, a symbol of strength, courage, and the bond between Alpha and Mate. The shadows of the past had been confronted, the curse challenged, and the kingdom given a chance to breathe once more. And while the future remained uncertain, one truth was clear. Kalen and Leora, bound by trust, courage, and love, would face it together. And somewhere in the distant forests, the whispers of the shadows lingered, a quiet reminder that darkness never fully sleeps. But now, it would find its match in the girl of fire and the Crimson Alpha who had learned not only to wield his power but to share it with the one he loved best. Together they watched the sunrise, the light spilling across the kingdom, and for the first time in generations, Arendor felt alive, not because the danger had vanished, but because the Alpha and his mate had found strength in each other, a force stronger than any curse, any enemy, or any shadow. The story of Leora and Kalen was no longer one of fear or defiance. It was a story of courage, redemption, and the transformative power of trust and love. Breath. And as the wind carried their laughter across the castle walls, one thing was certain. The night may return, but together they would always be its masters.